Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to add my thoughts to this important discussion that we're having about Bill S-5, an act to amend the Tobacco Act and the Non-Smokers Health Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. And one of the most important roles of any government is to protect the health and the safety of its citizens. This is something that we as Conservatives have always taken very seriously. And the previous Conservative government took a number of steps to improve the health of Canadians by funding and implementing various programs to reduce the smoking rate in Canada. Some of these initiatives included tightening advertising restrictions, banning flavored cigarettes that were seen as attractive to children, and introducing regulations for larger and updated warning labels. In fact, under the previous Conservative government, smoking rates among youth aged 15 to 19 decreased to 11%, representing the lowest rate recorded for this age group since Health Canada first reported smoking prevalence. We invested over $650 million to reduce the smoking rate across all ages and partnered with the Canadian Cancer Society, providing them $5 million in partnership to launch the Break It Off Tobacco Cessation campaign to encourage young adults to quit smoking. Now, these were positive, concrete steps that were taken to help Canadians lead healthier lives. But, Mr. Speaker, Bill S-5 goes in a totally different direction. As it is currently written, S-5 plans to make two key changes to the Tobacco Act. The first change is to introduce a framework into the Tobacco Act that will regulate vaping products. The second key change is to implement plain packaging requirements for tobacco products. Now, I understand the stated goal behind Bill S-5. The stated goal is to protect the health and safety of Canadians and to reduce youth smoking. But, Mr. Speaker, as I read it, this particular bill, quite frankly, could do much more harm than good. Now, as I mentioned, S-5 plans to implement plain packaging regulations that will see the outside packaging for cigarettes standardized, as well as the cigarette stick itself. Now, that means there would be no branding whatsoever. As a result, people who choose to smoke will not be able to tell one brand from another, either from the package or from the cigarette. Or indeed, will they be able to tell whether they've bought a legal product. In fact, Mr. Speaker, law enforcement agencies wouldn't be able to tell the difference either. Now, the government claims that this is designed to make cigarettes less attractive to young people. So that would in turn lower the youth smoking rate. Now, I'm concerned on a number of fronts that this portion of the legislation in particular will have just the opposite result. My first concern is the impact that the plain packaging regulations could have on the contraband tobacco market in Canada. Now, the reason why this market is a concern is because it's unregulated, unlicensed, and untaxed. Not only does the government lose an estimated $2 billion a year in taxes from the sale of these illegal cigarettes, but the money that is made off of them is used to fund very highly organized crime in Canada and abroad. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are parts of this great country of ours where contraband tobacco is big business. In some areas, it's reliably estimated that as much as 80% of cigarettes smoked are contraband. And I'm not exaggerating in the least when I say that there are also areas where the illegal cross-border trade of cigarettes between Canada and the US is serious and sometimes even deadly business. That's how big the stakes are. So what does plain packaging have to do with contraband tobacco? Well, by having a generic package for all cigarettes, it will make it much easier for contraband producers to both counterfeit and also to sell their own product with little chance of getting caught. This leads me to a second issue surrounding the safety of Canadians and their right to know what they are ingesting. As the contraband tobacco market is unregulated, there is no way to determine, much less control, the chemical makeup of the cigarettes. And because the packaging and the cigarette stick will be indistinguishable from one brand to the next, Canadians who choose to smoke will not only be unable to tell whether they're receiving their brand, but they'll also be unable to determine whether they're receiving legal, counterfeit, or contraband product. Now, since there's no way to control what chemicals are actually in these cigarettes, this could actually result in negative health impacts for Canadians and cause even more harm instead of reducing it. And believe me, Mr. Speaker, some contraband cigarettes have been known to have some rather nasty stuff in them. Now, to get back to the government's stated goal of harm reduction, I also have a serious concern regarding wording within the legislation that bans companies from saying that one product is less harmful than another. For example, the harmful chemicals that enter a person's body in smoking do so mostly once the cigarette is ignited. There are currently products available that simply heat the tobacco instead of igniting it, which significantly reduces exposure to much of the harmful chemicals. And these products have been proven to be significant aids to quitting smoking. But if this legislation passes, Canadians won't even be able to get to know about these products. The second half of this legislation deals with vaping products, which have also been deemed to be a less harmful alternative to smoking. But as a consumer, Canadians would be unable to know that these products are less harmful for them because of the advertising ban that would ensue if this legislation is passed. For a bill that is focused on harm reduction, it seems illogical that companies, or even Health Canada, would be allowed to educate Canadians that there are less harmful alternatives out there. In addition, the government claims that by switching to plain packaging, this will decrease the youth smoking rate. My concern here is twofold. Throughout my research and through consultation with a number of stakeholders, I've been unable to find reliable statistics that prove that implementing plain packaging reduces the urge for youth to start smoking. In my experience, they don't try smoking because they see a package and think it looks cool. In many parts of Canada, they can't see the package anyway because it's hidden by law from view within the stores in which it's sold. No, Mr. Speaker, they try it because their friends are doing it or because it's easy to access. Mr. Speaker, we all want to go home for the weekend, so I'll spare you going into a litany of all of the problems with this bill and how it contrasts with what the Liberals are putting forward in their marijuana legislation. Back to my second concern, and that is that if we implement plain packaging and end up fueling the contraband market, we could actually see an increase in the rate of youth smoking as a result of accessibility. One of the reasons why contraband tobacco continues to be popular is because of its low cost. In fact, in many areas where contraband tobacco is sold, a person can buy a baggie of 200 cigarettes for about $10. And that compares to buying the legal product for well over $100 for the same quantity. As a result, people buy the cheaper product to save money. Now, a lot of young people don't have the means to purchase $100 worth of cigarettes, but they may have the means to purchase cigarettes at $10. So if the contraband market is allowed to flourish, youth could quite conceivably have even more access to cigarettes as a result of their low cost. Now, as I stated earlier, Mr. Speaker, I understand and I even support the stated goal, but I have very serious issues with the path that the Liberals are taking to get there. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I ask that this House consider the very real and the very serious concerns that I've outlined today, taking them into consideration when developing their own thoughts about this bill, and think of my speech when S-5 is discussed at committee. Thank you.